North Korea Korean, /Mr. Chosun, literally /Mr. Park Chosun, or /RR, Buchan in South Korean usage, officially the Democratic People's Republic of Korea DPRK or DPR Korea, Korean, /Chosun Minja Juyui in Minkongwik, is a country in East Asia constituting the northern part of the Korean peninsula. The country is bordered to the north by China and by Russia along the Amnok known as the Yalu in Chinese and Tumen rivers, and to the south by South Korea, with the heavily fortified Korean Demilitarized Zone DMZ separating the two. North Korea, like its southern counterpart, claims to be the legitimate government of the entire peninsula and adjacent islands. Pyongyang is the country's capital and largest city. In 1910, Korea was annexed by Imperial Japan. At the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II in 1945, Korea was divided into two zones, with the north occupied by the Soviet Union and the south occupied by the United States. Negotiations on reunification failed, and in 1948, separate governments were formed, the Socialist Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, and the Capitalist Republic of Korea in the south. An invasion initiated by North Korea led to the Korean War 1950 to 1953. The Korean Armistice Agreement brought about a ceasefire, but no peace treaty was signed, and the border stayed the same as before. According to Article 1 of the Constitution of North Korea, the DPRK is an independent socialist state. North Korea holds elections, though they have been described by independent observers as sham elections. North Korea is a totalitarian dictatorship, with an elaborate cult of personality around the Kim dynasty. The Workers' Party of Korea WPK, led by a member of the ruling family, holds absolute power in the state and leads the Democratic Front for the reunification of the fatherland, of which all political officers are required to be members. According to Article 3 of the Constitution of the DPRK, Juche is the North Korean official ideology. The North Korean government denies these abuses.
Names.
The name Korea derives from the name Goryeo, also spelled Koryo. The name Goryeo itself was first used by the ancient kingdom of Goguryeo, which was one of the great powers in East Asia during its time, ruling most of the Korean peninsula, Manchuria, parts of the Russian Far East and parts of Inner Mongolia, under Gwanggaeto the Great. The 10th century kingdom of Goryeo succeeded Goguryeo, and thus inherited its name, which was pronounced by visiting Persian merchants as Korea. The modern spelling of Korea first appeared in the late 17th century in the travel writings of the Dutch East India Company's Hendrik Hamel. After the division of the country into North and South Korea, the two sides used different terms to refer to Korea, Chosun or Joseong, in North Korea, and Hank, in South Korea. In 1948, North Korea adopted Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Chosun Minja Juyui in Minkongwik, as its new legal name. In the wider world, because the government controls the northern part of the Korean peninsula, it is commonly called North Korea to distinguish it from South Korea, which is officially called the Republic of Korea in English. Both governments consider themselves to be the legitimate government of the whole of Korea. For this reason, the people do not consider themselves as North Koreans but as Koreans in the same divided country as their compatriots in the south, and foreign visitors are discouraged from using the former term.
History. Founding.
After the First Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, Korea was occupied by Japan from 1910 to 1945. Korean resistance groups known as Dongnipgon Liberation Army operated along the Sino-Korean border, fighting guerrilla warfare against Japanese forces. Some of them took part in Allied action in China and parts of Southeast Asia. One of the guerrilla leaders was the communist Kim Il-sung, who later became the first leader of North Korea. After the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II in 1945, the Korean peninsula was divided into two zones along the 38th parallel, with the northern half of the peninsula occupied by the Soviet Union and the southern half by the United States. Negotiations on reunification failed. Soviet General Terentiy Shtikov recommended the establishment of the Soviet Civil Authority in October 1945, and supported Kim Il-sung as chairman of the Provisional People's Committee for North Korea, established in February 1946. In September 1946, South Korean citizens rose up against the Allied military government. In April 1948, an uprising of the Jeju Islanders was violently crushed. The South declared its statehood in May 1948, and 2 months later the ardent anti-communist Syngman Rhee became its ruler. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established in the north on 9 September 1948. Shtikov served as the first Soviet ambassador, while Kim Il-sung became premier. Soviet forces withdrew from the north in 1948, and most American forces withdrew from the south in 1949. Ambassador Shtikov suspected Rhee was planning to invade the north and was sympathetic to Kim's goal of Korean unification under socialism. The two successfully lobbied Joseph Stalin to support a quick war against the South, which culminated in the outbreak of the Korean War. The military of North Korea invaded the South on the 25th of June 1950, and swiftly overran most of the country. A United Nations force, led by the United States, intervened to defend the South, and rapidly advanced into North Korea. As they neared the border with China, Chinese forces intervened on behalf of North Korea, shifting the balance of the war again. Fighting ended on the 27th of July 1953, with an armistice that approximately restored the original boundaries between North and South Korea, but no peace treaty was signed. Approximately 3 million people died in the Korean War, with a higher proportional civilian death toll than World War II or the Vietnam War, making it perhaps the deadliest conflict of the Cold War era. In both per capita and absolute terms, North Korea was the country most devastated by the war, which resulted in the death of an estimated 12 to 15% of the North Korean population, 10 million. A figure close to or surpassing the proportion of Soviet citizens killed in World War II, according to Charles K. Armstrong. As a result of the war, almost every substantial building in North Korea was destroyed. Some have referred to the conflict as a civil war, with other factors involved. A heavily guarded demilitarized zone (DMZ) still divides the peninsula, and an anti-communist and anti-North Korea sentiment remains in South Korea. Since the war, the United States has maintained a strong military presence in the South, which is depicted by the North Korean government as an imperialist occupation force. It claims that the Korean War was caused by the United States and South Korea.
Post-war developments.
The relative peace between the South and the North following the armistice was interrupted by border skirmishes, celebrity abductions, and assassination attempts. The North failed in several assassination attempts on South Korean leaders, such as in 1968, 1974, and the Rangoon bombing in 1983. Tunnels were found under the DMZ and tensions flared over the axe murder incident at Panmunjom in 1976. For almost 2 decades after the war, the two states did not seek to negotiate with one another. In 1971, secret, high-level contacts began to be conducted, culminating in the 1972 July 4 North-South Joint Statement that established principles of working toward peaceful reunification. The talks ultimately failed because in 1973, South Korea declared its preference that the two Koreas should seek separate memberships in international organizations. During the 1956 August faction incident, Kim Il-sung successfully resisted efforts by the Soviet Union and China to depose him in favor of Soviet Koreans or the pro-Chinese Yan'an faction. The last Chinese troops withdrew from the country in October 1958, which is the consensus as the latest date when North Korea became effectively independent. Some scholars believe that the 1956 August incident demonstrated independence. North Korea sought to become a leader of the non-aligned movement, and emphasized the ideology of Juche to distinguish it from both the Soviet Union and China. In United States policy making, North Korea was considered among the captive nations. Recovery from the war was slowed by a massive famine in 1954-55. Local officials had exaggerated the size of the harvest by 50 to 70%. After the central government took its share, starvation threatened many peasants. About 800,000 died. In addition, collectivization was resisted. Many farmers killed their livestock rather than turn them over to the collective farm. Another famine in 1994-98 killed 2.8 million. Industry was the favored sector. By 1957 industrial production reached 1949 levels. In 1959, relations with Japan had improved somewhat, and North Korea began allowing the repatriation of Japanese citizens in the country. The same year, North Korea revalued the North Korean won, which held greater value than its South Korean counterpart. Until the 1960s, economic growth was higher than in South Korea, and North Korean GDP per capita was equal to that of its southern neighbor as late as 1976. However, by the 1980s, the economy had begun to stagnate. It started its long decline in 1987 and almost completely collapsed after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when all Soviet aid was suddenly halted. An internal CIA study acknowledged various achievements of the North Korean government post-war: compassionate care for war orphans and children in general, a radical improvement in the status of women, free housing, free health care, health statistics particularly in life expectancy and infant mortality that were comparable to even the most advanced nations up until the North Korean famine. Life expectancy in the North was 72 before the famine, which was only marginally lower than in the South. The country once boasted a comparatively developed healthcare system. Pre-famine North Korea had a network of nearly 45,000 family practitioners with some 800 hospitals and 1,000 clinics.
Post-Cold War.
In 1992, as Kim Il-sung's health began deteriorating, Kim Jong-il slowly began taking over various state tasks. Kim Il-sung died of a heart attack in 1994, with Kim Jong-il declaring a 3-year period of national mourning before officially announcing his position as the new leader. Afterwards, North Korea promised to halt its development of nuclear weapons under the agreed framework, negotiated with U.S. President Bill Clinton and signed in 1994. Building on Nordpolitik, South Korea began to engage with the North as part of its Sunshine Policy. Kim Jong-il instituted a policy called Songun, or military first. There is much speculation about this policy being used as a strategy to strengthen the military while discouraging coup attempts. Flooding in the mid-1990s exacerbated the economic crisis, severely damaging crops and infrastructure, and led to widespread famine which the government proved incapable of curtailing, resulting in the deaths of between 240,000 and 420,000 people. In 1996, the government accepted UN food aid. On the 9th of October 2006, North Korea announced it had conducted its first nuclear weapons test. U.S. President Barack Obama adopted a policy of strategic patience, resisting making deals with North Korea. Tensions with South Korea and the United States increased in 2010 with the sinking of the South Korean warship Kenan and North Korea's shelling of Yeonbyong Island. On the 17th of December 2011, Kim Jong-il died from a heart attack. His youngest son Kim Jong-un was announced as his successor. In the face of international condemnation, North Korea continued to develop its nuclear arsenal, possibly including a hydrogen bomb and a missile capable of reaching the United States. Throughout 2017, following Donald Trump's assumption of the U.S. presidency, tensions between the United States and North Korea increased, and there was heightened rhetoric between the two, with Trump threatening fire and fury and North Korea threatening to test missiles that would land near Guam. The tensions substantially decreased in 2018, and a détente developed. A series of summits took place between Kim Jong-un of North Korea, President Moon Jae-in of South Korea, and President Trump. It has been since North Korea's last ICBM test.
Geography.
North Korea occupies the northern portion of the Korean peninsula, lying between latitudes 37 degrees and 43 degrees N, and longitudes 124 degrees and 131 degrees E. It covers an area of North Korea is bordered by China and by Russia along the Amnok known as the Yalu in Chinese and Tumen rivers, and borders South Korea along the Korean demilitarized zone. To its west are the Yellow Sea and Korea Bay, and to its east lies Japan across the Sea of Japan. Early European visitors to Korea remarked that the country resembled a sea in a heavy gale because of the many successive mountain ranges that crisscross the peninsula. Some 80% of North Korea is composed of mountains and uplands, separated by deep and narrow valleys. All of the Korean peninsula's mountains with elevations of or more are located in North Korea. The highest point in North Korea is Baekdu Mountain, a volcanic mountain with an elevation of above sea level. For example, the song, "We Will Go to Mount Baekdu" sings in praise of Kim Jong-un and describes a symbolic trek to the mountain. Other prominent ranges are the Hamgyong Range in the extreme northeast and the Rangra Mountains, which are located in the north-central part of North Korea. Mount Kumgang in the Tbek Range, which extends into South Korea, is famous for its scenic beauty. North Korea had a 2019 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 8.02/10, ranking it 28th globally out of 172 countries. The longest river is the Amnok-Yalu River, which flows for. The country contains 3 terrestrial ecoregions: Central Korean deciduous forests, Cheongbai Mountains mixed forests, and Manchurian mixed forests.
Climate.
North Korea experiences a combination of continental climate and an oceanic climate, but most of the country experiences a humid continental climate within the Köppen climate classification scheme. Winters bring clear weather interspersed with snowstorms as a result of northern and northwestern winds that blow from Siberia. In addition to the constitution, North Korea is governed by the 10 principles for the establishment of a monolithic ideological system, also known as the 10 principles of the One Ideology System, which establishes standards for governance and a guide for the behaviors of North Koreans. The Workers' Party of Korea WPK, led by a member of the Kim dynasty, has an estimated 3 million members and dominates every aspect of North Korean politics. It has 2 satellite organizations, the Korean Social Democratic Party and the Chondoist Chong-U Party, which participate in the WPK-led Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland, of which all political officers are required to be members. Kim Jong-un of the Kim dynasty is the current supreme leader or Suriryong of North Korea. He heads all major governing structures. He is General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea, President of the State Affairs Commission, and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. His grandfather Kim Il-sung, the founder and leader of North Korea until his death in 1994, is the country's eternal president, while his father Kim Jong-il, who succeeded Kim Il-sung as the leader, was announced eternal General Secretary and eternal Chairman of the National Defense Commission after his death in 2011. Its role is to deliberate and decide the work on defense building of the state, including major policies of the state, and to carry out the directions of the chairman of the commission, Kim Jong-un. Legislative power is held by the unicameral Supreme People's Assembly (SPA). Its 687 members are elected every 5 years by universal suffrage, though the elections have been described by outside observers as sham elections. Supreme People's Assembly sessions are convened by the SPA Presidium, whose chairman Cho Yong-hee since 2019 represents the state in relations with foreign countries. Deputies formally elect the chairman, the vice-chairman and members of the presidium and take part in the constitutionally appointed activities of the legislature, pass laws, establish domestic and foreign policies, appoint members of the cabinet, review and approve the state economic plan, among others. The SPA itself cannot initiate any legislation independently of party or state organs. It is unknown whether it has ever criticized or amended bills placed before it, and the elections are based around a single list of WPK-approved candidates who stand without opposition. Executive power is vested in the Cabinet of North Korea, which has been headed by Premier Kim Dok-hun since the 14th of August 2020. The Premier represents the government and functions independently. His authority extends over 2 Vice Premiers, 30 Ministers, 2 Cabinet Commission Chairmen, the Cabinet Chief Secretary, the President of the Central Bank, the Director of the Central Bureau of Statistics and the President of the Academy of Sciences. The 31st Ministry, the Ministry of People's Armed Forces, is under the jurisdiction of the State Affairs Commission. North Korea, like its southern counterpart, claims to be the legitimate government of the entire Korean peninsula and adjacent islands. Despite its official title as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, some observers have described North Korea's political system as an absolute monarchy or a hereditary dictatorship. It has also been described as a Stalinist dictatorship.
Political ideology.
The Juche ideology is the cornerstone of party works and government operations. It is viewed by the official North Korean line as an embodiment of Kim Il-sung's wisdom, an expression of his leadership, and an idea which provides a complete answer to any question that arises in the struggle for national liberation. Juche was pronounced in December 1955 in a speech called on eliminating dogmatism and formalism and establishing Jushin ideological work in order to emphasize a Korea-centered revolution. Its core tenets are economic self-sufficiency, military self-reliance and an independent foreign policy. The roots of Juche were made up of a complex mixture of factors, including the cult of personality centered on Kim Il-sung, the conflict with pro-Soviet and pro-Chinese dissenters, and Korea's centuries-long struggle for independence. Juche was introduced into the constitution in 1972. Juche was initially promoted as a creative application of Marxism-Leninism, but in the mid-1970s, it was described by state propaganda as the only scientific thought and most effective revolutionary theoretical structure that leads to the future of communist society. Juche eventually replaced Marxism-Leninism entirely by the 1980s, and in 1992 references to the latter were omitted from the constitution. The 2009 constitution dropped references to communism and elevated the Songun military first policy while explicitly confirming the position of Kim Jong-il. However, the constitution retains references to socialism. Juche's concepts of self-reliance have evolved with time and circumstances, but still provide the groundwork for the Spartan austerity, sacrifice and discipline demanded by the party. Scholar Brian Reynolds Myers views North Korea's actual ideology as a Korean ethnic nationalism similar to statism in Showa Japan and European fascism.
Kim dynasty.
North Korea is ruled by the Kim dynasty, which in North Korea is referred to as the Mount Baekdu bloodline. It is a 3-generation lineage descending from the country's first leader, Kim Il-sung. Kim developed a cult of personality closely tied to the state philosophy of Juche, which was later passed on to his successors, his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un. In 2013, this lineage was made explicit when Clause 2 of Article 10 of the newly edited 10 Fundamental Principles of the Korean Workers' Party stated that the party and revolution must be carried eternally by the Mount Baekdu bloodline. According to New Focus International, the cult of personality, particularly surrounding Kim Il-sung, has been crucial for legitimizing the family's hereditary succession. The control the North Korean government exercises over many aspects of the nation's culture is used to perpetuate the cult of personality surrounding Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. While visiting North Korea in 1979, journalist Bradley Martin wrote that nearly all music, art, and sculpture that he observed glorified great leader Kim Il-sung, whose personality cult was then being extended to his son, dear leader Kim Jong-il. Claims that the dynasty has been deified are contested by North Korea researcher B.R. Myers. Divine powers have never been attributed to either of the two Kims. In fact, the propaganda apparatus in Pyongyang has generally been careful not to make claims that run directly counter to citizens' experience or common sense. He further explains that the state propaganda painted Kim Jong-il as someone whose expertise lay in military matters and that the famine of the 1990s was partially caused by natural disasters out of Kim Jong-il's control. The song No Motherland Without You, sung by the North Korean Army Choir, was created especially for Kim Jong-il and is one of the most popular tunes in the country. Kim Il-sung is still officially revered as the nation's eternal president. Several landmarks in North Korea are named for Kim Il-sung, including Kim Il-sung University, Kim Il-sung Stadium, and Kim Il-sung Square. Defectors have been quoted as saying that North Korean schools deify both father and son. Kim Il-sung rejected the notion that he had created a cult around himself, and accused those who suggested this of factionalism. Following the death of Kim Il-sung, North Koreans were prostrating and weeping to a bronze statue of him in an organized event. Similar scenes were broadcast by state television following the death of Kim Jong-il. Critics maintain that Kim Jong-il's personality cult was inherited from his father. Kim Jong-il was often the center of attention throughout ordinary life. His birthday is one of the most important public holidays in the country. On his 60th birthday, based on his official date of birth, mass celebrations occurred throughout the country. Kim Jong-il's personality cult, although significant, was not as extensive as his father's. One point of view is that Kim Jong-il's cult of personality was solely out of respect for Kim Il-sung or out of fear of punishment for failure to pay homage, while North Korean government sources consider it genuine hero worship. The extent of the cult of personality surrounding Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung was illustrated on the 11th of June 2012 when a 14-year-old North Korean schoolgirl drowned while attempting to rescue portraits of the two from a flood. On the 10th of January 2021, Kim Jong-un was formally elected as the General Secretary in 8th Congress of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, inheriting the title from his late father Kim Jong-il, who died in 2011.
Foreign relations.
As a result of its isolation, North Korea is sometimes known as the Hermit Kingdom, a term that originally referred to the isolationism in the latter part of the Joseon dynasty. Initially, North Korea had diplomatic ties only with other communist countries, and even today, most of the foreign embassies accredited to North Korea are located in Beijing rather than in Pyongyang. In the 1960s and 1970s, it pursued an independent foreign policy, established relations with many developing countries, and joined the non-aligned movement. In the late 1980s and the 1990s, its foreign policy was thrown into turmoil with the collapse of the Soviet bloc. Suffering an economic crisis, it closed a number of its embassies. At the same time, North Korea sought to build relations with developed free market countries. North Korea joined the United Nations in 1991 together with South Korea. North Korea is also a member of the Non-Aligned Movement, G77, and the ASEAN Regional Forum. North Korea enjoys a close relationship with China, which is often called North Korea's closest ally. The relations were strained in the last few years because of China's concerns about North Korea's nuclear program. However, the relations have started to improve again and been increasingly close, especially after Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, visited North Korea in April 2019. North Korea had diplomatic relations with 166 countries and embassies in 47 countries: Estonia, France, Iraq, Israel, Japan, Taiwan, and the United States. As of September 2017, France and Estonia are the last two European countries that do not have an official relationship with North Korea. North Korea continues to have strong ties with its socialist Southeast Asian allies in Vietnam and Laos, as well as with Cambodia. North Korea was previously designated a state sponsor of terrorism because of its alleged involvement in the 1983 Rangoon bombing and the 1987 bombing of a South Korean airliner. On the 11th of October 2008, the United States removed North Korea from its list of states that sponsor terrorism after Pyongyang agreed to cooperate on issues related to its nuclear program. North Korea was redesignated a state sponsor of terrorism by the U.S. Under the Trump administration on the 20th of November 2017, the kidnapping of at least 13 Japanese citizens by North Korean agents in the 1970s and the 1980s has affected North Korea's relationship with Japan. U.S. President Donald Trump met with Kim in Singapore on the 12th of June 2018. An agreement was signed between the two countries endorsing the 2017 Panmunjom Declaration signed by North and South Korea, pledging to work towards denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. They met in Hanoi from 27 to the 28th of February 2019, but failed to achieve an agreement. On the 30th of June 2019, Trump met with Kim along with Moon Jae-in at the Korean DMZ.
Inter-Korean relations.
The Korean demilitarized zone with South Korea remains the most heavily fortified border in the world. Inter-Korean relations are at the core of North Korean diplomacy and have seen numerous shifts in the last few decades. North Korea's policy is to seek reunification without what it sees as outside interference, through a federal structure retaining each side's leadership and systems. In 1972, the two Koreas agreed in principle to achieve reunification through peaceful means and without foreign interference. On the 10th of October 1980, then North Korean leader Kim Il-sung proposed a federation between North and South Korea named the Thumb-Left. Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in shake hands during the Inter-Korean Summit. April 2018. The Sunshine Policy instituted by South Korean President Kim Dae-jung in 1998 was a watershed in inter-Korean relations. It encouraged other countries to engage with the North, which allowed Pyongyang to normalize relations with a number of European Union states and contributed to the establishment of joint North-South economic projects. The culmination of the Sunshine Policy was the 2000 Inter-Korean Summit, when Kim Dae-jung visited Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang. Both North and South Korea signed the June 15 North-South Joint Declaration, in which both sides promised to seek peaceful reunification. On the 4th of October 2007, South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun and Kim Jong-il signed an 8-point peace agreement. However, relations worsened when South Korean President Lee Myung-bak adopted a more hardline approach and suspended aid deliveries pending the denuclearization of the North. In 2009, North Korea responded by ending all of its previous agreements with the South. It deployed additional ballistic missiles and placed its military on full combat alert after South Korea, Japan and the United States threatened to intercept Cheonan-2 space launch vehicle. The next few years witnessed a string of hostilities, including the alleged North Korean involvement in the sinking of South Korean warship Cheonan, a North Korean artillery attack on Yeonbyong Island, and growing international concern over North Korea's nuclear program. In May 2017, Moon Jae-in was elected president of South Korea with a promise to return to the Sunshine Policy. In February 2018, a détente developed at the Winter Olympics held in South Korea. In September, at a joint news conference in Pyongyang, Moon and Kim agreed upon turning the Korean peninsula into a land of peace without nuclear weapons and nuclear threats.
Law enforcement and internal security.
North Korea has a civil law system based on the Prussian model and influenced by Japanese traditions and communist legal theory. Judiciary procedures are handled by the Supreme Court, the highest court of appeal, provincial or special city-level courts, people's courts and special courts. People's courts are at the lowest level of the system and operate in cities, counties and urban districts, while different kinds of special courts handle cases related to military, railroad or maritime matters. Judges are theoretically elected by their respective local people's assemblies, but in practice they are appointed by the Workers' Party of Korea. The penal code is based on the principle of nullum crimen sine lege, no crime without a law, but remains a tool for political control despite several amendments reducing ideological influence. Courts carry out legal procedures related to not only criminal and civil matters, but also political cases as well. Political prisoners are sent to labor camps, while criminal offenders are incarcerated in a separate system. The Ministry of People's Security (MPS) maintains most law enforcement activities. It is one of the most powerful state institutions in North Korea and oversees the national police force, investigates criminal cases and manages non-political correctional facilities. It handles other aspects of domestic security like civil registration, traffic control, fire departments and railroad security. The state's security department was separated from the MPS in 1973 to conduct domestic and foreign intelligence, counterintelligence and manage the political prison system. Political camps can be short-term re-education zones or quasi total control zones for lifetime detention. Camp 15 in Yodok and Camp 18 in Bukche have been described in detailed testimonies.
Human rights.
Float equals right equals places equals North Korea is widely accused of having perhaps the worst human rights record in the world. The state's security department extrajudicially apprehends and imprisons those accused of political crimes without due process. People perceived as hostile to the government, such as Christians or critics of the leadership, often with their whole family and mostly without any chance of being released. Based on satellite images and defector testimonies, Amnesty International estimates that around 200,000 prisoners are held in 6 large political prison camps, where they are forced to work in conditions approaching slavery. Supporters of the government who deviate from the government line are subject to re-education in sections of labor camps set aside for that purpose. Those who are deemed politically rehabilitated may reassume responsible government positions on their release. North Korean defectors have provided detailed testimonies on the existence of the total control zones where abuses such as torture, starvation, rape, murder, medical experimentation, forced labor, and forced abortions have been reported. On the basis of these abuses, as well as persecution on political, religious, racial and gender grounds, forcible transfer of populations, enforced disappearance of persons and forced starvation, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry has accused North Korea of crimes against humanity. The International Coalition to Stop Crimes Against Humanity in North Korea (ICNK) estimates that over 10,000 people die in North Korean prison camps every year, according to Human Rights Watch, which cites interviews with defectors. North Korean women are routinely subjected to sexual violence, unwanted sexual contact, and rape. Men in positions of power, including police, high-ranking officials, market supervisors, and guards can abuse women at will and are not prosecuted for it. It happens so often that it is accepted as a routine part of life. Women assume they cannot do anything about it. The only ones with protection are those whose husbands or fathers are themselves in positions of power. The North Korean government rejects the human rights abuse claims, calling them a smear campaign and a human rights racket aimed at government change. In a 2014 report to the UN, North Korea dismissed accusations of atrocities as wild rumors. While there is consensus in regards to human rights abuses being committed in North Korea, it is extremely difficult to gauge the full extent due to many defectors' testimonies falling apart and the fact that defectors are incentivized through cash payments in return for interviews. Depending on the quality of the information, the payments range from $50 to $500.
Military.
The Korean People's Army (KPA) has 1,106,000 active and 8,389,000 reserve